Morning, students. We are going to do a sewing machine introduction. So as you can see, we have our Hobby 1142 in front of me here. And you will also need your Duotang that has your word bank in it and also the picture of our sewing machine. So we're going to need these two items as we work through the different parts of the sewing machine today. So gather those along with a pencil and you'll be ready to begin our activity. All right, so as we begin, I'm going to be pointing out and providing names of the different parts of the sewing machine for you, and you are then going to take your Duotang sheet that you have and your picture of the sewing machine, and you are going to enter in the words or the names of the pieces of the machine as I say them. So we're going to be starting at the top of our machine over here on this left-hand side. And as we review what they do and I tell you what they're called, you're going to write them in on those lines. So let's get started. Looking at the top of our machine, we have a lever up here. And so what this here is called, and I'm going to zoom in for you. I'm talking about this one right here. Okay, as we move the hand wheel on the side, you'll see that it can come up and go down. Okay, so this is called the take up lever, and it is responsible for taking the thread that we thread our sewing machine with and bringing it down through the needle and connecting it with the thread from the bobbin. Okay, so this right here is the take up lever. Moving beside that, we see right here at the top of our machine, this here is the bobbin thread guide. And so this will guide the thread both as we thread the bobbin and as we thread our sewing machine. So it is called the thread guide, okay, at the top of our machine. As we move over, the next thing that you're going to see on our sewing machine here is the spool pin. So the spool pin in this machine sits horizontal. Some machines will have it sitting vertical, so it will be going up. And our sewing machine also comes with kind of a stopper that we can use to hold our thread, our spool of thread in place. So this here is called the spool pin. Beside that, right here, we have a bobbin winder. This bobbin winder spindle we use to wind our bobbins, and you'll notice that it can move from left to right. So when we have a bobbin on here and we're going to wind it up with some thread, we would move it to the right, and then when we're done, we will move it back. If you leave the bobbin winder in this position, the sewing machine will not work. So you do need to push it back so that your sewing machine will work. Okay, as I back up a little bit just to get a better view, you see that we have a dial right here. Okay, so this dial is something that we generally don't play with. It's kind of the tension setting of our thread. And so we're just going to leave this in the setting that it's in. However, below that, you will see a guide, and it has kind of the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And so this shows you what type of stitch you can select or what the capabilities are of your sewing machine. So we refer to this as our stitching guide. So if we were wanting to change from maybe a straight stitch to a zigzag stitch, we would look up here to find out which letter we would need to turn our dials to. So again, this here is our stitching guide. Moving around the side of our sewing machine, this here is a hand wheel, and it can turn, okay, full ways around. And this is the hand wheel that I was talking about as I zoom out. Notice as I rotate that, it also brings up this take up lever over here. So you can see this pops out, and you can see the needle is actually going down and back up. If you watch down here as I spin, see how that is moving up and down in this bottom corner. So this is referred to as the hand wheel. Okay, now we're going to look at these buttons along the front of our sewing machine. So here we'll notice that we have those A, B, C, D buttons that match along with the stitching guide. And this is how we select which stitch we want. So this button here is called the stitch selector. Okay, and we simply rotate it to select or match with the type of stitch that we would like to sew. Next, we're going to have another dial down below, and it will have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and this is the stitch length. That means how long your stitch is going to be. Most of our machines are set where they need to be, which is about 2.5. We really shouldn't have to adjust it much. Below that, right here, we have a lever. This is a reverse stitch lever, and that is how we get our machine to go back a couple stitches. So we simply push that and we begin to sew using the foot pedal or the hand wheel, and then we release and it will begin to stitch forward again. Remember, this is a very important button because that's how we keep our stitching. It helps to secure the stitching in place so that it doesn't just fall out. One of the most important buttons is around the side of this sewing machine, beside the power cord, and that is the power switch. So if it's in the 0, that means the off position. If we flip it up, it turns it into the on position. When you turn it on, you'll notice that a light comes on in your sewing machine, and it'll tell you that you're ready to begin sewing. So that is the power switch. All right, drawing our attention back to the front of our sewing machine. We here have a presser foot. So around the side of our machine, more along the back of the machine. Here allows us to adjust our presser foot. Okay, so when we are ready to sew and we place our material under, we always put our foot down to secure the material. Helps us to sew a straighter line. And so we use this presser foot when sewing. When you push it down, you'll notice it kind of makes like a clicking noise. And then when you want to release your fabric, you will press it up. So again, the presser foot lifter. All right, here we have our thread tension dial. Okay, so you can see the numbers. Oops, sorry, I cannot see the numbers. Up here, we have our thread tension dial. Again, this is something that we usually don't have to adjust unless our machine's having difficulty. We'll likely just leave it exactly as it is. So right now you can see it's between about 4.5, between the 4 and the 5. All right, moving down in here, we have a few important things. The first is this button right here. This is called the throat plate release button. And so you need to push it and pull, and you'll notice that the throat plate note located beside it is released. So again, you push it and you pull it, and the throat plate comes off of our sewing machine. Okay, so this is the throat plate, and beside it is the throat plate release button. If you take it off, you just simply click it back into place. The front of our machines, most of them have an accessory tray on them. This tray can be removed by simply lifting up or pulling out, and then you have a smaller space if needed, depending on what you're sewing. It also is used sometimes to store items. In our case, we don't store anything into our accessory tray. The last piece that I want to draw your attention to is along the side. It's located right here, and that is a thread cutter. So if you had a piece of thread and you were sewing, you simply would use that and it would cut the thread for you in the event that you didn't have scissors, or it's sometimes handier to use the one that's attached to your machine. So that is the thread cutter. Now this is kind of a brief overview of our sewing machine, our Hobby 1142. This is a machine that we'll be doing most of our sewing with throughout our sewing class. So get familiar with it, explore it, and make sure that you complete that assignment.